What if I told you that $500,000 Bitcoin was bearish? What if I told you that $1 million Bitcoin was bearish? What if I told you that $10 million Bitcoin was extremely bearish? What I'm about to tell you makes $70 million Bitcoin seem bearish. What I will tell you in this video is so cosmically bullish, it will blow your mind. To set the stage for these cosmically bullish predictions, we need to go back to a conversation that Luke Broyles had with Peter Dunworth. Peter is a financial advisor over in Australia, and at the beginning of their conversation, Luke asks Peter, what is going on? People can feel something amiss in the air, but what is that?
If we take a helicopter view of this and look, I guess, beyond assets, it's probably important to have a look at what's happening from a society as well. It feels like there is a breakdown of trust across our institutions.
We have a hard time believing what we're seeing. Everybody has an agenda. This is what makes Bitcoin so beautiful. It is a trustless system. You might say, no, there's still trust in the system, but it's the same kind of trust that you have in 2 + 2 = 4, or that if you drop a rock, it will fall because you have to trust in gravity. It's just a system. In this next blip, Peter goes on to explain how some of the most respected investors in the industry, period, are investing in Bitcoin.
And there's maybe the exception of a few older guys who, I think the Stanley Druckenmillers, the Paul Tudor Jones, who are, basically mid-60s, maybe older, who have lived in an environment where they've seen the tough times in the 70s, and they're probably the ones who are adjusting the fastest. And I think about those three people in particular who have, of the elder set, who have picked up technology the fastest, and I think are probably best positioned to do that. I think Paul Tudor Jones, in 2020, April, maybe 3 years ago, he wrote his Fastest Horse newsletter talking about Bitcoin being the fastest horse in an inflation race. You've got Stanley Druckenmiller, who's pro-Bitcoin, and then you've got Bill Miller, who supposedly has 50% of his assets in Amazon and 50% in Bitcoin, and this is one of the greatest value investors of all time.
Quote, one of the greatest value investors of all time, end quote. Speaking of Bill Miller. Bill Miller has recently said that he likes Bitcoin better than gold, which is hardly surprising. Bitcoin has all of the advantages of gold and none of the disadvantages. The only advantage that gold has over Bitcoin is that it's a big heavy piece of metal that you could use as a paperweight. You can't do that with Bitcoin. Aw, shucks. We're still circling the point of these cosmically bullish predictions that we're going to get to towards the end of this video, but we have to continue to set the stage. Next up, Peter talks about how there's nowhere to hide anymore.
Property, peak saturation debt levels. Stock market, peak saturation debt levels. Bond market, peak saturation debt levels. There's nowhere for this thing to go. And this is why when everything's capped out on a debt perspective, everything now rises and falls at the whim of, the Federal Reserve.
This is one more reason that the Fed is so insidious. When things get to the point that they're at right now and everything is falling and rising in tandem, it makes for some very choppy waters. There's no islands to hide on right now. As the cosmic bull prepares to step on stage, we have to understand that Bitcoin isn't just good for you or me or our friends or family. It is good for all 8 billion citizens of planet Earth. Every single human soul will benefit from Bitcoin.
From a societal perspective, what I think is a really important thing about Bitcoin is that I believe for the first time in history, this has the ability to align incentives for everyone on Earth. And this is a complete game changer.
The way I have defined goodness as a whole, you could say that this sandwich is good and that cup of coffee was good or going on this particular vacation was good. And I mean good as all encompassing. The way I define that is what is good for me right now, good for you right now, and good for all of us in the future. If we were all working in that environment, how could the world be anything but better and better and better, moment after moment after moment? For the first time ever in all of history, our incentives across the globe can be aligned. Here, Luke makes the point that trying to price things when you're too far outside of the system is really impossible.
Because it's like asking a Roman, how do you describe a Boeing 747 to a Roman and ask them to price that? It's like, what, they're going to price it in terms of chariots, or they're going to price it in terms of olive oil? I mean,
how would a Roman price in a 747? It's this giant machine that can fly through the sky. It can carry all of those chariots that you have there, your horses, your olive oil, all of the stuff. You can put it into this machine and it will go in the sky and take all of that stuff that you would normally put on boat and take weeks and weeks and weeks to travel and do it in half a day. How would a Roman even conceptualize that? He wouldn't. It would just be, you're talking magic here. That doesn't, what? And now we can start talking about price. Peter here describes Bitcoin as the first triple point asset. I'll let him describe it.
Just very briefly, what I call Bitcoin is the first triple point asset. And what this is for the first time in history, we have got a number of tech innovations within Bitcoin that lead Bitcoin to being the best store of value, the best mean of exchange, and the best unit of account, all at the one time. And so if you look at those three functions of money, you've got 10 trillion in gold, 100 trillion USD, and 2,000 trillion in the double entry ledger system.
Just to go over that again real quick, you've got 10 trillion in gold, 10 trillion in USD, and 2,000 trillion in the double entry ledger system. This is all the money that's moving around. And because Bitcoin is the best store of value, the best medium of exchange, and the best unit of account, if it were to swallow all of that...
And the only Bitcoin we have available for trade on a daily basis is whatever's minted on the day. That's not too outrageous for me to think that if you look at the numbers, and this is, I'll give you the formula and then we can work on the numbers, but if we think that there's 6.3 trillion of global trade, and today there's 900 Bitcoin minted, by those numbers and by the formula, you divide total global trade by the number of Bitcoins minted, you get to a $7 billion valuation.
If there is 6.3 trillion, all of the commerce that's happening around the globe, and you only have 900 Bitcoin minted a day, that is today, the end of May 2023, and as you well know, that will be halved next year. So instead of 900, it'll be 450 in circulation each day. If 6.3 trillion in global trade is competing and being used only with what's minted, and you might say, well, why would it only be what's minted in a day? Because all of the other stuff is locked away in cold storage. If $6.3 trillion goes into what is being minted in a day, then that is $7 billion per Bitcoin. $7 billion. And that is today. If you double that, because it's halved, so double the amount, then you have $14 billion Bitcoin. You heard that right. In today's terms, each Bitcoin worth $14 billion. Now, of course, the very next thing that somebody would say is, well, okay, what are the chances of that happening?
And I know that I am not smart enough to know 100% in the future what's going to happen, but my thought experiment that enters my mind is, what if there's a 1% chance Peter's right here? What's 1% of 7 billion? 70 million? It's like, okay, if Bitcoin has a 1% chance of being exactly what you described and your thesis being correct, it should be $70 million.
Wrap your head around that for a second. Just take a moment. If there is a 1% chance that this is accurate, 1% of 7 billion is 70 million. If you go, well, that is still way too crazy for me. Okay, let's reduce that by 10. Let's say 0.1% that he's right. That's still $7 million per Bitcoin. And these are the extremely conservative figures. The moment in time that we are in right now is incredibly special. I cannot stress that enough. If you think back to trains or airplanes, the amount of time that it took for people to realize how impactful that wasn't all that long. And yet, there were still people before the understanding of what this new technology really meant and what it was going to do for the world, before that clicked in, people were still more than happy to trade their horses or their hay or whatever for some iron and some stock in a railroad company because they didn't think the railroad company or the airplane company was going to take off. My last piece of advice is this. If you don't understand Bitcoin, spend some time doing the research because, as we say in the Bitcoin community, TikTok, next block. And whether you're on this train or not, it is going to keep on chugging along.